Now then everyone, so you joined me in today's video because you want to learn how to do sign replacements and things like that. And you've seen the video thumbnail and you want to add some subtle sign replacement gems like the one you can see here, and this incredibly good flat image replacing what was behind it, which was an advert of some description. So I'm going to show you two methods of doing sign replacement, and these methods can be used for all sorts of different things, not just sign replacements, but also putting things like portals in your scenes, or attaching objects into scenes that your characters can interact with, or building full 2D scenes and green screening somebody into them. So you just imagine, instead of this being a single 2D plane on a 2D background, it becomes a 3D creation. So yeah, I'm going to show you both ways of doing this because it's slightly different in each one, and talk to you about some of the methodologies while I go through it. So with this particular scene, I'm sort of going to talk to you first about the process. So if I just get rid of these, you can see the original sign is this minus 70% sign, and essentially the movement of the camera isn't that dramatic, and there isn't really many people. There's this lady's head here just sort of overlapping that corner there, but nothing else great happens. Now obviously if I wanted to cut out and replace this sign, I'd also have to mask around or rotoscope around the lady as she walks in front of it. Again, only a few seconds and frames, which wouldn't take too long, but yeah. In this scene, there isn't any. Well, the first principles of this first scene that we're looking at here is all of what is happening on one plane of view. And what I mean by one plane of view is that this is constantly seen throughout this shot. Even though it's a little bit shaky and the camera is moving, there's only one plane. And this second video, however, we're getting multiple planes of view. So we start off with the sign in full view, and then as I press play, let me just turn off the audio for the street. As we press play, should I say, you can see that the sign disappears off camera. Now to achieve this second effect, you've got to use a 3D camera tracker, because the tracking points eventually disappear off this single plane of view and onto this other plane which can no longer be seen. So that's why there are two processes to do this. So depending on how complex your scene is, you may be better off doing one or the other. So let's jump straight into this first video and kind of go through how I created this scene. So I suppose the best way to do this really would be to kind of break down my process. So I'll do it up to a stage and then jump back to these pre-made videos. So this first scene here is from this MP4 here. It's actually quite a long video, and I just sort of chopped out the bottom frame. So if I just mute these for a second, you can see here that the video clip is only a few seconds long. Now at this point, what I did is I created a new null object, and I'm not going to create the null object because it's already been done earlier on here. So null1 is this first null that I created, and once I created that null, I just left it above here and I selected my footage layer. So at the time there was only these two layers at this point, and with this bottom layer I went over here on the right hand side to tracker. Now if tracker isn't showing up for you, just go to window and go down to tracker and make sure that it's turned on there, but as default it should be there. And at this point, the tracker that I chose was track motion. And what this will do is give you one tracking point, which wasn't enough, so I selected where it says track type transform. I chose perspective corner pin, and this gave me 4 tracking markers. Now because I was, now to move around my scene, now I'm just going to hold space and drag over. Now essentially what you want to do at this point is grab each, you want to avoid doing that, so this is where you have to zoom in slightly and fart about a little bit. So at this point I grabbed this first tracker and I moved it to quite a high contrasty area. The reason you want to go for a high contrast area is so that the tracker actually moves better with it, and to be honest the edges of this are a little bit well, we could go for about here. It's a little bit hard for the software to see because, as you can see from this pixelation here, the colours do blend quite well. So I'm going to choose that first area there and this third area around here, and then you get the gist of what's happening at this point. Next, I'm going to go, can I just grab and select this? Let's see. No. Dear me. This is the only problem when you're working in such a small monitor. So this next bit I went over to here, and this last point. And this can sometimes be a bit of a trial and error, you know, like if you don't get good results, you can try it again, choosing different high contrasty areas. Now the size of these boxes isn't too important. Well, it is if you've got lots of rotation and movement happening. The bigger these boxes are, the more they're going to scan the area that they're moving in. So if you've got some tricky areas like I did on this, you can always adjust the box sizes. But obviously be aware that the bigger you make these boxes, the slower the track's going to go because it's analysing more area. So at this point, what we do, or what I did, is I moved my cursor. No, I left my cursor, my bad. I left my cursor where it was, and I clicked on this, or you could click on this analyze backwards, and what that's going to do is trigger this timeline indicator here to move backwards in time, and then you can click on the forward, analyze forward button, which will push it forwards. Now when you're watching this tracking happening, and again, I'm not going to press it because, well, I can show you this way. So when I press forwards, as you can see there, it's tracked. It's got all these track points. Now, if I saw anything weird happening at this point, like maybe this tracker was going all the way over here or something like that, you can always track backwards until you get the point where the tracker goes off, and you could move it back into place. But just be aware that that's going to get super annoying. So it could be worth maybe tracking something else with better contrasty areas. So imagine this was my full scene tracked. What I did at that point is clicked edit target, make sure that that null 1 was selected, because at this point there was only the video and null 1, and then I had hit OK. Now I'm not going to do any of that because I've already done this, so I'm just going to reset these track points and get rid of them. Go back to here. So once my null 1 had all of the data, so once you've clicked on, actually did I miss a step there? I think I did actually. So once you've clicked edit target, choose null 1, you then need to click apply. That apply will then set all of that tracking data into null 1. So that's what nulls are great for, storing tracking information and data and things like that. So at this point, my null 1, as you can see here, has all of this tracking information within it, and it was time to start building my yellow solid. So what I did was created a new solid layer, and again I'll do this with you to show you my process, but really it can be anything up to you. Now because I wanted to replicate the sign so it fits in, all I did was grab the colour picker here, and I just chose a nice bright part of that yellow sign, clicked OK, and then hit OK. Now this is what you get. So what you can do is hit T to bring up opacity, lower that opacity, something like this, and then with your solid selected and the pen tool, you can just nicely draw around the area that you would like to cut out, and it's as simple as that. And then you just increase that back to 100. And job's done, you can go home. Not quite. So at this point, I suppose I could do this for reals now with you. So at this point, your solid layer that you've just put over there, you can grab the pick whip and just drag that onto null 1. And what this is going to do is parent this solid to that null. So basically, whatever this null does as the parent, your solid is going to follow it. Now, in theory, this should work, but if I press space, it has worked. I was going to say it's not going to work because it's only a 2D layer, but I'm only actually moving in 2D space. You can also make it 3D, and that should also, if it hasn't worked for you, making it 3D may suddenly work. Now I am getting a bit of jitteriness. If you saw there very briefly, there was a little bit of movement that I'd need to sort out, and I could sort it out, or I could just hope that nobody notices it. Of course, you'd want to sort it out properly. Right, so at that point, The next stage was creating this text, which is going to sit on there, and as you can see, that text is in the same colour, not the same font, and obviously it's not very readable, but it's there, and it's not moving or wobbling or bouncing around. And the reason for that is I actually tried to just parent this to null 1, but I got some strange results, and I suppose I can show you what happens. So if I just parent this text to null 1, again following the same process as I did with the sign, you may notice there it jumps up and down, which is really annoying. So I didn't want that to happen, so I had to create another null. So I turned off this yellow, turned off my text layer, and this time I created another null. So I went to right click, new, and then null, and went back over to my tracker by selecting this bottom click, went back over to tracker, clicked on track motion, and selected, just in the transform options, position and rotation. And at this point what I did was grab the basically just affixed this to the sign that you can see there, just this text, because it's again high contrasty, and I just tracked forwards and backwards exactly like I did before, edited target, made sure that null 2 was selected, hit apply. When you hit apply with this, it's going to apply the dimensions to the x and y axis, and then you'd hit OK as well, and it then set all of the data into this null 2, which rendered better results for me. So let me show you what I mean. So with these two trackers, with this version of the tracker, grab the pick whip again, hold it over null, release, and I got a much better result with no jumping up and down. So again, another way to sort of fix maybe this scene here jumping up and down on the side was maybe just to track the motion there, because it isn't exactly a scale for scale replacement, it's just a close to scale replacement. So that is how I effectively created this scene, and yeah, that was it. Now this particular scene was slightly harder and took a lot more attempts and a lot more fiddling around. So in this scene, as you can see here, this is what we have. It's a much faster scene, and it's got an element of 3D because the plane that we're tracking goes off screen. And whenever a plane goes off screen, if you're just trying to do the other method on the tracker here, it gives you some very peculiar results. It basically, the tracking markers smash against the side of the frame and then get pulled across with it. So it's basically using the tracker here, you can't do anything three-dimensional with it. So this is what I had to do. So in the effects and presets, I typed in 3DC, and that brings up 3D camera tracker, obviously 3D space C, so I started to spell out the camera tracker. I dragged this onto this video 1 clip here, and at this point it brings up the effect controls. The camera tracker here starts to analyze the scene, and it takes a bit of time because it's GPU heavy. So you give it a time, maybe 5 minutes. I think it took about 30 seconds or so for it to do this scene, but again, depending on your system, this could take a long time or not so long. I left the settings as fixed angle of view, 3D solved, track size points. As you can see here, there are little trackers, bigger on the things that are close to us, smaller on those that are further away. You can always increase these sizes so it looks something like that. And the idea with this is once it had done its job and it solved the camera, it brought up these options like this. And if ever you're trying to track something, you want to kind of move your mouse until you see one of these target size sort of target planes here. You want the target plane to roughly match the plane of the sign. So you can see here, if I chose this one, for example, the target is kind of facing towards the sky, which is not what we want. This one is good because it's pointing towards us, and this one's really good because it's pointing towards us. So I'd probably choose this one this time around. So you just click once you found a target you like. You just click it once, it locks it. You then right click, and you've got create text, create solid, create null. Now if I was to just delete these two, you would see what it gives us. In fact, I'm going to do that now because why not? Let's do this one together. So I've got my camera tracking info. So I'd click up here, right click, and create solid and camera. Now instead of creating a null and a camera, I'm going to do a solid, and I'm going to show you why. So this solid, as you can see, is not so great because it's the wrong colour and all the rest of it. But that's not important at this point. All we want to do is make sure that our solid there stays perfectly still, which, as you can see, it does. Wow, movie magic. So that's looking cool. So what I wanted to do at this point is basically scale this small thing to size and sort of match it up there. So so I just hit S to bring up scale and just scale this thing around. Now at this point you can kind of see. This is a good place to sort of see this. At this point, you can kind of see that the dimensions of sort of rotation and all that kind of stuff's wrong. So it's a good point at this stage to sort of try to get this all lining up, and you can move these parameters to sort of get something that looks about right. And yeah. So another way to do this, which might make it a bit easier, is also just to, well, you'll see how to get it correct. So at this point, I'm just going to keep scaling it and then moving it down. And there's probably quicker ways of doing this. This is again, like, I'm showing you sort of stuff that you could find a quicker way of doing this with practice. So the more I zoom this thing out and get it scaled up, you can see that there's some strange diameters happening. So this is the fiddly part where it's a case of like getting this correct, so it all kind of looks like it matches up. Mine's still strangely wrong. So let's just keep increasing the sizes until we get close, and then we can figure out what's going on. So the reason if you're wondering like why is it doing this, it's purely because we've created a 3D camera, and it's how this thing is reacting in front of the 3D camera. So this is looking closer actually. Now we're doing well. So we just keep scaling this until I get it fully the size of this sign, like so. And we're getting close. We're close to getting it perfect here, I reckon. Yeah, that's close enough. Now, obviously, when I play this back, I'm going to see loads of issues with it. But for now, let's just hope it works. So I'm going to hit space to play that through. And yeah, that's close. That's pretty close. No one would know. Nobody would know. At this point, I'm also going to note we want to click on this button here, which is Enable Motion Blur. And this is going to simulate the motion blur as the camera pans around. So it's going to blend it a little bit better. Wow. Cool, cool, cool. Right, now what we want to do is kind of get rid of this solid altogether, because this is the colour of the picture behind. So what I did at this point is I right-clicked in the project bin and not in the sequence section. So I right-clicked up here, and there is settings such as import, and I went to solid, and then this gave me the option to create a solid. So again, I got my little eye picker here and grabbed a colour closest to this sign and hit OK. And this has brought up this pale solid. Now the trick at this point is with this selected. Now this is where you've got to be careful with this process. So what you've got to do is click on the layer that's in your sequence, and then grab your layer that you want to import and hold down Alt, or in my case, because I'm using a Mac, Option, and then you hold Alt and then drag it over the top and then let go. And this is going to replace that solid with that object that you've just brought in. Now, as you can see, there's some issues going on there with scale, so you've got to scale it in and fiddle around with it a little bit more, just like we did earlier. But that's basically it. There we go, completely off. But so that's it. That's how I created these two scenes. So two different processes for two different kinds of tracking data that you might be using. This is really helpful, like I said, if you're doing a visual effects piece where you're implementing a creation into a live action plate, or it's great for sign replacements like this if you've got some product placement you need to hide. Good for number plates on cars and stuff like that if they're driving past, so you can just quickly track them out. or just signs and things like that. Maybe you want to give somebody a new shop front and you want to design the front of a shop front or something for them. There's all sorts of different things you could do this technique for. So, and that's really it. It's just a case of tracking and farting around with your layers and enabling things and doing a bit of tracking data and that kind of stuff. So hopefully this was a really fast but informative tutorial, and have fun doing some sign replacement with your own projects. Thank you very much.